In the early years of World War II, one aircraft dominated the skies of the Pacific, the Mitsubishi A6M Zero. Agile, light, and seemingly unbeatable, Japan's Zero became a symbol of terror for Allied pilots. It ruled from Pearl Harbor to the Coral Sea, leaving destruction in its wake. For almost 2 years, no American fighter could match its turn rate, climb, or range. But in 1943, that would change. From the assembly lines of Grumman aircraft engineering came a machine built not just to compete with the Zero, but to crush it. Its name was the F6F Hellcat. The Hellcat story began in 1941, after U.S. Navy pilots flying the older F4F Wildcats realized they were completely outclassed. The Japanese Zeros could outturn and outclimb them with ease. The Navy needed something new, something stronger, faster, and able to survive where others burned. Grumman's chief designer, Leroy Grumman, took that challenge personally. He told his engineers, "Build me a fighter that any average pilot can take off a carrier, fight in, and come home in one piece." What followed was one of the fastest aircraft development programs in history, from blueprint to flight in just 18 months. The prototype, designated XF6F1, first flew in June 1942, powered by a Wright Cyclone engine. But it wasn't enough. Grumman wanted more power, more muscle. Within weeks, they ripped out the old engine and replaced it with the massive Pratt Whitney R-2800 double wasp, an 18-cylinder monster producing over 2,000 horsepower. The result was breathtaking. The new F6F3 Hellcat could climb faster, dive harder, and carry 6 50 caliber Browning machine guns, enough firepower to shred a Zero in seconds. It wasn't graceful, but it didn't have to be. It was a brawler built to take hits and keep flying. By the time it entered combat in August 1943, the tables in the Pacific were about to turn forever. The first F6F Hellcats reached the Pacific in August 1943, joining VF-9 and VF-5 aboard the carriers USS Essex and USS Yorktown, CV-10. Their arrival couldn't have come at a better time. American forces were pushing toward the Central Pacific, and air superiority meant survival. The Japanese still believed their Zero was untouchable. For nearly 2 years, it had dominated every engagement. But that illusion shattered over Marcus Island on September 1, 1943, when Hellcats flew their first combat mission. The results stunned both sides. Hellcat pilots tore through the defending Japanese fighters, claiming 5 kills without a single loss. It wasn't just skill, it was the aircraft itself. The Hellcat's thick armor, self-sealing fuel tanks, and rugged frame allowed it to take hits that would have destroyed a Zero instantly. Japanese pilots were shocked. They watched their tracers bounce off Hellcat fuselages, while those heavy 50 caliber rounds from the American guns shredded their fragile aluminum skins. The Zero, once feared for its elegance and agility, now looked fragile, even outdated. Word spread quickly across the Pacific. American carrier pilots began to believe in their machines again. One said, "If you can see the Zero, you can kill it. The Hellcat will bring you home." The battles intensified through late 1943 as the US Navy pushed toward Tarawa and the Gilbert Islands. The Hellcat became the Navy's sword and shield, launching from carriers in wave after wave, sweeping Japanese fighters from the skies before bombers struck. The secret wasn't just power, it was balance. The Hellcat gave average pilots a chance against veterans. Its wide landing gear made it forgiving on carrier decks, and its cockpit visibility and rugged construction meant that even rookie aviators could fight, survive, and learn. For Japan, the loss of its elite pilots from earlier campaigns was now irreversible. For America, a new generation of flyers, men trained in mass numbers, flying better machines, was rising fast. The Hellcat wasn't just another fighter. It was a symbol of what America's industry and innovation could achieve in the middle of war. And the Japanese were only beginning to understand what that meant. By the end of 1943, the F6F Hellcat was no longer the new kid on the deck. It was the face of American air power in the Pacific. From the USS Essex, Yorktown, and Bunker Hill, squadrons of Hellcats launched daily raids against Japanese-held islands, Tarawa, Kwajalein, and the Marshall Chain. In every engagement, the results were the same. the Zero was losing. Fast. The numbers told the story. Between September and December 1943, Hellcats destroyed over 400 Japanese aircraft while losing fewer than 30 of their own. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, U.S. pilots felt they had complete control of the skies. The key was design philosophy. The Zero had been built around agility and range, sacrificing armor and protection. The Hellcat was the opposite, built for survival and firepower. Its powerful R-2800 double Wasp engine gave it incredible acceleration in dives, allowing pilots to dictate the terms of combat. American pilots learned to use boom and zoom tactics, diving from above, striking hard, then climbing out before the lighter Zero could react. The once feared Japanese ace tactics of turning and dogfighting no longer worked. The Hellcat simply refused to play that game. Japanese reports began to note something alarming. The new American fighter climbs like a rocket and dives like a stone. Its armor cannot be penetrated. This wasn't just a new airplane. It was an industrial victory. The United States could produce hundreds of Hellcats every month, replacing any losses instantly. Japan, on the other hand, was running out of skilled pilots and struggling to build aircraft in bombed-out factories. For many surviving Japanese aviators, facing a Hellcat in 1943 was like running into a wall of steel and fire. Their once superior Zeros were now relics of a vanished era. In the skies over the Pacific, the balance of power had shifted permanently. Before the Hellcat could dominate the skies, its pilots had to master it. The aircraft was powerful, but demanded respect. A single mistake on takeoff or landing could flip a plane over the carrier deck. That's why American naval training evolved into a machine as precise as the planes themselves. At Naval Air Station Jacksonville, rookie pilots practiced endless touch-and-go landings on painted outlines of carrier decks. Only after hundreds of flawless runs would they face the real thing, a moving carrier pitching through the Pacific. Instructors drilled them on every emergency scenario: engine fires, hydraulic failures, and ditching procedures. The Hellcat's designers at Grumman had made one thing clear: this was a fighter for the average pilot. Unlike the delicate Zero that demanded perfection, the Hellcat forgave mistakes. Its wide landing gear made carrier landing steadier, and its cockpit visibility gave new pilots confidence in combat. By 1944, the United States had built not only an army of planes, but an army of pilots ready to fly them. Many were barely 20 years old, yet they carried enough firepower to decide the fate of empires. In the skies above the Pacific, experience didn't matter anymore. What mattered was training, numbers, and the machine itself. Japanese pilots, trained through years of elite flight schools, were now facing American replacements who could be trained, equipped, and deployed in weeks. This industrialized training system became America's secret weapon. The Hellcat wasn't just a fighter. It was the embodiment of a system that could take ordinary young men and turn them into the deadliest force in aviation history. By mid-1944, the Pacific skies were no longer contested. They were dominated. But the true test of the Hellcat's supremacy came in June during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, an engagement that would later be known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. On June 19th, Japanese Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa launched over 400 carrier-based aircraft from his remaining fleet, hoping to crush the American invasion of the Marianas. What he didn't realize was that hundreds of Hellcats from Task Force 58 were waiting. Guided by superior radar, radio coordination, and disciplined tactics. The first radar pings appeared early in the morning. Within minutes, hundreds of Hellcats climbed into formation, intercepting the incoming waves of Japanese planes long before they could reach the fleet. What followed was nothing short of annihilation. American pilots described it as like shooting fish in a barrel. The Hellcat's .650 caliber Browning machine guns tore through the lightly built Zeros and Judies. Entire formations disappeared before they could even dive on the American carriers. By the end of the day, Japan had lost more than 300 aircraft, most of its carrier-based air force, while the Americans lost barely 30. The skies that had once been ruled by the rising sun now belonged entirely to the Hellcat. One pilot, Lieutenant Alex Vratiu, became a legend that day, downing 6 Japanese dive bombers in just 8 minutes. His grin in post-battle photos became the symbol of American air dominance. Young, confident, and unstoppable. The Japanese Navy never recovered. With their best pilots gone and their carriers crippled, the Empire's ability to project power across the Pacific collapsed. From that moment on, the Hellcat wasn't just winning battles, it was ensuring victory in the war. The devastation of the Philippine Sea left Japan's air power shattered. In the aftermath, only a handful of trained pilots and aircraft remained. The empire that had once launched lightning raids across the Pacific now struggled to defend its own homeland. Factories in Nagoya and Yokosuka were running out of aluminum, fuel, and even experienced workers. Airfields that once hummed with the sound of Zeros now stood half empty. The Japanese high command tried to rebuild, training teenagers, students, and even unfit conscripts to fly hastily built aircraft. But they were sending boys to fight men. By late 1944, the once feared Zero was hopelessly outmatched. The Hellcat was faster, tougher, and armed to the teeth. Pilots described engagements that felt less like dogfights and more like extermination missions. Many Japanese aircraft never even reached combat altitude before being destroyed. Desperation drove innovation and suicide missions. With no hope of regaining air superiority, Japan turned to the Kamikaze. Hellcat pilots, flying air patrols near Leyte Gulf and Okinawa, now faced enemies who didn't try to survive. Instead, they dove straight into ships. It was a new kind of warfare, one that tested the nerves of even the most battle-hardened aviators. But the Hellcat was built for endurance. Its rugged frame could absorb punishment, and its pilots were trained to adapt. They developed counter-tactics, spotting kamikazes early, diving fast, and intercepting them before impact. The skies over the Philippines and Okinawa became the last arena of the Empire's dying fury. The numbers told the story. For every Hellcat lost, the Japanese lost more than 10 planes. By the time the war neared its end, Hellcat pilots had claimed over 5,000 kills, more than any other Allied naval fighter in history. To most Americans back home, the Hellcat was a symbol of victory, sleek, powerful, unstoppable. But to the men who flew her, it was both a guardian and a gamble. Every time they climbed into that narrow cockpit, they knew that survival wasn't guaranteed. Inside, the Hellcat was cramped and loud. The Pratt Whitney R-2800 engine roared like a thunderstorm inches from the pilot's chest. Heat from the engine baked the metal panels, and the smell of oil and gunpowder filled the air. Yet the pilots trusted her. They called her Grumman Ironworks, a nickname earned because she could take hits and still bring her men home. Carrier operations were the real test. Landing a Hellcat on a moving deck in the middle of rough seas was a feat of nerves. Many young pilots joked that it was easier to shoot down a Zero than to land safely on their own ship. But the Hellcat's wide undercarriage and strong frame made it forgiving, saving countless lives that might have been lost in lesser aircraft. During long missions over the Pacific, pilots often flew hours over empty ocean, guided only by compass and instinct. The loneliness of the sky weighed heavy, especially when missions stretched deep into enemy territory. They carried photos of families taped to dashboards, good luck charms in pockets, and the quiet hope of seeing another sunrise. And yet, for all the fear and exhaustion, there was pride, a fierce bond between man and machine. The Hellcat was more than just an aircraft. It was the pilot's shield, sword, and salvation. When the carrier decks cleared, and those big radial engines roared to life, every man who climbed into a Hellcat knew he was part of something larger, the machine that was winning the war. By late 1944, the United States was ready to strike at the heart of Japan's empire, the Philippines. For the first time since 1942, American forces were returning to the island's General Douglas MacArthur had vowed to liberate. And leading the way in the skies were the Hellcats. Task Force 38, the largest carrier strike group ever assembled, sailed into the Philippine Sea with hundreds of Hellcats on deck. Their mission was simple: total air dominance. Before a single soldier set foot on the beaches of Leyte, Hellcats had already swept the skies clean of Japanese resistance. From dawn until dusk, they flew continuous sorties, strafing enemy convoys, blasting anti-aircraft positions and hunting down anything that moved. The Hellcat's heavy armament, 650 caliber machine guns, shredded trucks, trains, and even small ships. Pilots described it as painting the jungle with fire. When Japanese reinforcements attempted to move across the islands, Hellcats intercepted them mid-air, turning the sky into a killing field. By October 1944, Japan's air defense in the Philippines had ceased to exist. But victory came at a cost. Tropical storms, exhaustion, and relentless missions pushed both man and machine to their limits. Pilots flew 4, sometimes 5, sorties a day, landing back on decks littered with bullet holes and fuel leaks. Yet the Hellcat endured, and so did the men. When MacArthur finally waded ashore at Leyte and declared, "I have returned," the Hellcats had already written that victory in smoke and flame across the sky. They weren't just supporting the liberation. They had made it possible. The liberation of the Philippines marked the turning point of the Pacific War. From that moment, Japan's defeat was only a matter of time. As 1945 began, the Pacific War reached its bloodiest phase. 2 names would come to define the cost of victory: Iwo Jima and Okinawa. For the men flying the Hellcat, these battles were more than missions. They were survival against a cornered enemy, fighting to the last breath. When the invasion of Iwo Jima began, in February 1945, Hellcats from carriers offshore took to the skies before dawn. Their task was to pound every inch of the island: gun positions, caves, tunnels, and even airstrips. The volcanic terrain made every target difficult, but Hellcat pilots attacked relentlessly, diving through smoke and flak to give cover to the Marines clawing their way up Mount Suribachi. But Okinawa was worse. Beginning in April, the Japanese launched the largest wave of kamikaze attacks of the entire war. Hundreds of suicide planes came screaming out of the clouds, aiming directly for the U.S. fleet. The Hellcats rose to meet them, again and again. For 82 straight days, they fought in skies filled with burning wreckage. Pilots had seconds to decide: shoot or die. Many kamikazes got through, but without the Hellcats, hundreds more would have struck their targets. It was air combat at its most chaotic. No formations, no mercy. Veteran pilots described it as hell in every direction. Fuel was low, nerves were shattered, but they kept flying. Some squadrons shot down over 100 enemy planes in a single week. When the smoke finally cleared over Okinawa, the toll was staggering. Japan had lost more than 7,000 aircraft. American losses were heavy too, but the Hellcat had once again proven why it was the Navy's deadliest weapon. Those battles marked the end of Japan's air power. The once proud Zero now burned across the Pacific, and the Hellcat had claimed the skies for good. By mid-1945, Japan's empire was collapsing. Its navy was gone, its cities burned, and its skies belonged entirely to the Americans. Yet the Hellcat pilots kept flying, day after day, mission after mission, right up to the war's final hours. From carriers stationed off Japan's coast, Hellcats launched pre-dawn strikes that roared across Tokyo Bay. Their targets were airfields, shipyards, and transport hubs, not just anything that could still move. What once required massive fleets of bombers was now handled by small groups of carrier fighters with precision. The Japanese could barely fight back. Radar detected their few remaining planes minutes before they took off. By the time they reached altitude, Hellcats were already there, waiting. Entire squadrons were wiped out before firing a shot. But even victory carried a heavy price. Many pilots had been flying for years through the entire Pacific campaign. They had seen comrades vanish into the ocean, flamed out in mid-air, or disappear behind enemy lines. As one pilot wrote in his diary, "We win, but we've all paid for it." On August 15, 1945, when Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender, Hellcat squadrons were still airborne. Some were returning from missions when the message reached them. For a moment, the Pacific grew silent. No gunfire, no explosions, just the steady hum of engines carrying men home. In the end, the Hellcat had done what no other aircraft could. It had broken the back of Japan's Air Force, defended every major American naval advance, and secured victory across thousands of miles of ocean. The numbers told the story of dominance. Over 5,000 enemy aircraft destroyed for the loss of fewer than 300 Hellcats in aerial combat. A kill ratio unmatched in the history of aviation. When the war ended, the Hellcats' pilots returned home as heroes. The world moved on to jets and new technologies, but those who flew the Grumman F6F would never forget the aircraft that carried them through the storm and brought them back alive. When World War II ended, the skies over the Pacific grew quiet, but the legend of the F6F Hellcat was only beginning. For the pilots who had flown her, the war was over, but the lessons she taught shaped the future of aviation for generations. The Hellcat became the blueprint for every naval fighter that followed. Its balance of firepower, protection, and simplicity showed engineers that combat wasn't just about speed. It was about survivability. The Grumman design philosophy, build it strong and make it bring the pilot home, became the foundation of American carrier aviation. In the early years after the war, Hellcats remained on duty. Some patrolled the Pacific as part of the occupation forces in Japan. Others were used in training new aviators who would go on to fly the next generation of fighters. The jet-powered Panthers and Cougars. A few Hellcats found a second life beyond the military. They appeared in air shows, war films, and museums, their engines still roaring decades after the war. For veterans, hearing that familiar growl was like hearing an old friend's voice again. Even today, historians credit the Hellcat as one of the key reasons the U.S. Navy achieved total dominance in the Pacific. It wasn't just a machine, it was a symbol of American industry, adaptability, and resolve. The aircraft that had been born out of necessity had turned into the greatest naval fighter of its era. By the numbers, its achievements were staggering. More aerial victories than any other Allied naval aircraft, a kill ratio of 19-1, and a record of reliability unmatched by even later generations. But for the men who flew her, the Hellcat's legacy wasn't written in statistics. It was written in survival. The Hellcat didn't just win a war, it saved thousands of pilots who might otherwise have been lost. That was its greatest victory of all. In the years after the war, Japan rebuilt from ashes. Cities, factories, and memories all reshaped by defeat. For many surviving Japanese pilots, the Hellcat became a ghost that haunted their recollections of battle. They spoke of it with a strange mix of fear and respect, calling it the Unstoppable One. Former Zero ace Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's most celebrated pilots, later admitted that once the Hellcat entered the war, their dominance ended forever. It could dive faster, climb higher, and take hits that would destroy any Japanese plane, he said. Against it, we had no chance. For American pilots, the memories were just as vivid. Not of victory, but of the faces behind the enemy aircraft. Many later confessed that their respect for Japanese aviators grew with every mission. They were brave, disciplined, and doomed, one Hellcat veteran recalled. They kept coming even when they knew the war was lost. Over time, museums, books, and reunions brought former enemies together. At one event in the 1970s, American and Japanese veterans stood beside a restored Hellcat and Zero. There were no speeches, no boasts, just quiet reflection. For them, the machines were no longer symbols of war, but of survival. In Japan, the Hellcat came to represent something deeper, a reminder of what industrial power and technological adaptation could achieve. In America, it remained a badge of honor, a story of how a simple, rugged fighter helped end one of history's darkest conflicts. When people today visit the aircraft carriers turned museums or see a Hellcat gleaming under hangar lights, they're seeing more than metal and rivets. They're seeing courage, innovation, and the triumph of endurance over desperation. The Hellcat's roar has long faded from the Pacific skies, but its story still echoes in every pilot's oath, every carrier launch, and every moment when skill and strength decide the fate of men.